Good morning, everyone. Today we're going to do another little session here on the theme of grotesque heads. So, keeping in mind the elements of drawing, we'll start with a just simple line, and then we'll create, using line, we're going to create here a shape, egg-shaped oval. And we're going to do this in profile. And we'll do another older person here. So let me get this just going a little bit here. Egg-shaped oval, and then we'll add the back of the head. The last one we did an elongated head. Today we're going to do it just a little bit different. We're going to extend the back of the head a little bit more. So kind of like the Aboriginal skull we looked at, it had the occipital portion extended further on out. Okay, so here we got it started, just nice and simply. We've got the egg-shaped oval representing the front portion. We always start with an egg-shaped oval, then we added the second egg-shaped oval. Now we're going to find the halfway point of this first egg-shaped oval, find the center point, and break this into 3 equal parts, and that'll let us know where the eye is going to be placed. So it's going to be placed somewhere right in here. Keep it nice and light in case I want to make some changes. And again, it's just a capital letter A turned on its side. If we take the top section and the bottom section, we break it down into 3 equal parts, then we know where to add the features. So that is keeping everything within the concept of idealized proportion. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the concept of idealized proportion, but I'm going to then make some changes to add a little more character. So we'll add the nose into the middle third. And in this case, I think I'll have kind of an older, a little pointier nose, maybe coming out in here and tucked down. And we'll have the brow coming in here. And we can have this little crook in the nose, and then it comes down, come back in. And in the upper mouth, I'm going to, in this particular case, I think I'll just try to keep this facial angle a little bit more straight. So coming off the nasal spine, we're just gonna come in here and have this come down back a little bit. And I'm going to extend the lower lip to give it a little bit more interesting character. And have that come in here, and then continue that. And then in this case, I'm going to have a smaller chin, I believe. Let's try something like this. And then we can have a few fleshy folds coming down in here. We'll have boxier mandible. We can have some of these little older wrinkles through here. This coming down into there. And back of the head. Let's have a few, well, let's get the ear in here real quick. We'll have a little bit more unusual ear combining in there. Then the zygomatic bone and the temporal bone. And let's have a few folds through here. Temporal ridge in there. A little bit of a receding forehead. And then, so we want to have the parietal bone coming up here and connecting onto the, and then the parietal bone is going to slope down in a bit of an angle here. So we'll change the shape up a little bit, and then we come down into the occipital bone. The mastoid process would be in here where the sternocleidomastoid muscle is going to connect, and then we have the trapezius muscle connect in here. And we'll have a few, maybe have a little fleshy fold in there. Let's get this big, powerful neck muscle in here. And have the ear kind of turned in a little bit. Trying to just take some of the norms and change them up a little bit here. And then the sternocleidomastoid muscle comes in here and it splits off into two pieces. The trapezius wraps through here. Can have a little bit of the cervical column showing in there. And the trapezius. And the trapezius would come in here. And the back of the ear. Let's have the lobe coming down a little bit lower. And then we'd have the temporalis muscle in here. And let's get that lip. This coming behind with a few teeth, lower lip extended out. And try to give a little bit more character in here. A little bit of a line through there. And a little bit more square, boxier chin. And the fleshy fold coming off. This fleshy fold in here coming down in. And there's usually a few of these in here, so we can have a few in there. Then the neck. Kind of a large, sort of bulbous nose. Not much space between there and the upper lip. Again, lower lip extended out. Master muscle through there. A bit of a vein through here. And let's make the neck a little, make this guy a little thicker. And then now we can start doing a little bit of shading here. So we kind of have a bunch of this blocked in. Let me just, before we start shading, I would like to soften a few of these areas. Because when we shade, it's nice when it's cleaner. So So I just, a couple of spots I want to just make sure I have the line where I want it. Some of the shading will cover some of the lines, but there's a few things that would be nice to not have show through. Okay, so now the shading portion here. So the mastoid process, let me just get this, the occipital part of the skull's through here. And then this back portion of the trapezius. So it's gonna all come along this plane. We have the eye set back in the head. So we'll start with the capital A. I'll start with the eye here. So we'll extend the lids. We want to make sure that this upper eyelid can actually close over the lower eyelid. And at this point it can. And I'm going to have a little bit of a fleshy fold coming over the edge of the eye, kind of into a little crow's foot. And then the lower lid coming back through here. And make the eye a little bit elliptical in shape. Then we have this portion of the orbit of the eye. I'm going to have my core shadow through here. This side plane of the nose is going to have a tone. We'll have light in this area. Where it goes underneath is going to have a tone. So core shadow and reflected light. Core shadow with reflected light. Cast shadow in here in the nostril. Coming down. And then we're going to have this little area, this little fleshy fold next to the nose. And that comes in here. Side plane of the nose coming down behind the section of the eye. Now it's important that we put a light tone up here on the top of the nose because we want our light to remain inside the form. We want to avoid rim lighting. In order to create three-dimensional form, you need to have light within the form, not on the edge of the form. If you put light on the edge of the form, it destroys the form. So that's an important principle of shading to keep in mind. Then we'll have this temporal ridge right through there, and a little bit of tone on this other side. Frontal bone has a little bit of light. This temporal ridge comes across. This section in here has a light tone. There's going to be a cast shadow underneath here onto the top of the eyelid and to the side plane of the nose. The temporal muscle is going to have a tone in here. Let's put a tone on all the top portion of the parietal bones now up in here. Needs a tone. So let's clearly define that. And we can extend this out just a little bit further. And then I'm going to have a little fold in here. I'm going to put a tone on all of this. So this portion, the occipital portion in here, I'm going to have a tone. There'll be a suture line somewhere in there. And let's get a tone on all of this. I'm gonna get a light tone on all of this quickly, and then we'll go in and start enhancing some of the structure. Mastoid process coming through here. And now this lobe of the ear now is going to have a tone. The back portion, there's a tone through here. Right here is core shadow with reflected light underneath. Cast shadow inside the external auditory meatus area. We're going to have light up in this portion of the ear. Core shadow through there with reflected light, and a cast shadow in here where it goes under. Core shadow through here. A little bit of light in that section in there. So we have light at the top, light in this section here. Everything underneath is going to fall into a little bit of shadow. The zygomatic arch is going to have a tone. And this little cartilaginous portion here is going to have some light. Where the mandible comes through here, we have core shadow with reflected light. And here, the cheekbone, and we have a little bit of a rounded area through here. All of this is going to have a tone. It's going to have a tone coming down here, softer, half tone. The under portion of the eye, we're going to create kind of a little lip, a little shelf on the top that has some light on it, but then the rest goes into shadow. And then underneath here, the chin. The upper lip is going to have light through here, but we need to have a little bit of a tone between the lips. There's a little bit of a cast shadow in there. So we want to add that. And then there's a plane in here. And we want to put shadow on that. The chin, this portion of the mandible has a tone. Now all of this part, even though it's going to have a fleshy area to it, we're going to put a tone on all of this, and then we will start to shade the form with inside of the shadow. So let's connect the plane here of the cheekbone now. So it's where the temporal bone and the zygomatic bone meet. And right in here, the cheekbone is where the maxilla and the zygomatic bone meet. We have a few little fleshy areas in there. This portion comes off here, especially with older people, with the muscle and the skin starts to sag. And we can have some more of that in here. Then we have more of the neck area to deal with. Now the zygomatic or sternocleidomastoid muscle right through here. It's a big, powerful muscle that turns your neck. Show a hint of the vein coming across here. And get a tone on either side. Remember, underneath the lobe, there's always a cast shadow. So we want to make that really relevant through there. And get that cast shadow in here. There's the clavicle. Now the occipital portion back here, we're going to have a little tone there. This little fold here, you're going to have core shadow with reflected light, and then a cast shadow onto the fleshy portion below, and a cool turn coming out underneath. This portion of the skull needs to also have core shadow and halftone. And now we'll start to work in this area, the temporalis muscle. And the back portion here of the parietal bone. We're going to put a core shadow in here with reflected light to help it turn. And the trapezius muscle wrapping through here. And the back portion of the trapezius coming through here. So we're starting to get a little bit of a tone over most of this. And we're keeping in mind all the, so when we're as we begin this shading process, it's really important that we understand the anatomical structure, the underlying structure, and you want to shade each of those individual forms. It's very much like shading simplified geometric shapes, but it's just more complex than that. So a good way to practice shading is by shading geometric shapes. If you don't have a model to look at and you want to try something a little different, it's always a good idea to draw some simplified shapes. Still life can be very beneficial at helping people get better at understanding form and shading. To fix a few things now. I'm going to lighten the top of this nose a little bit more. And fix the reflected light here on the bottom just a little bit. I can put some of that shadow back in a minute. A little bit of light on top of this eye. Now the top portion of this eye, I don't want it quite so wide. I want it a little bit smaller, so I'm going to lower that and then make that, give it a thickness so the eye falls into shadow. And up here on the edge of the brow, I want to have a little bit of a cast shadow in here, so the eye sits in this orbit. And then the cheekbone, the zygomatic bone, I want to have a little bit more of a tone through there. And this fleshy fold. A little bit of cast shadow between the fleshy fold and the nose. The mouth. And the extended lip. That's a little better. And it's going behind on the other side. So I want to put a little bit of light back on this lower lip, because it does extend out in front of the upper lip. But I want to have a few little creases in there, show the age. Cast shadow underneath. Remember, we as humans have a chin, whereas the greater apes do not. So, and we'll have this come down in here a little bit. And now I can gradually go in and just put a little bit of a half tone on the sided plane of the nose and the base of the nose. Probably could lighten this just a little bit up here on the brow. I want that line a little bit more distinct, and then the sharp turn in the nose up above. So now we have, I'm going to get a darker core shadow along this bone. And then this muscle here can have a little bit more of a tone. And the frontal bone is going to have a little bit of a tone where it connects in here to the parietal bone. And as we move back, because light's coming from above and this side, we want to make sure we get a little bit of this plane has a bit of a tone. Tone through here. And this bulbous portion that sticks out at the back is going to have a little bit of light falling on top of it. But as it goes under, it's going to have shadow. And a little bit of cast shadow through here from the lobe of the ear. And the mandible. So I have this a little bit of light connecting the lobe and the mandible, and I want this part of the lobe to have a little bit more light on it, right in through here. And then the top section of this portion of the ear is going to have some light. This section in here will have some light. And coming around, and there's a little bit of light that'll hit underneath there, so we can soften that. Cast shadow in here, core shadow. I'll get the core shadow back in. And the ear connects to the skull in there. There's a little bit more cast shadow through here. So we're trying to get all the shapes of the auditory meatus, the helix, the antihelix, recognizing all those forms. And the master has a tone. 1, 2. Have the skin pulling down, but it's all going to come into shadow in here. You can have light above, but it's still, where it wraps around the mandible, still needs to fall into shadow. And then light. Now we can put a little light in there, a little light in there, a little bit through there. That cut doesn't have to be so, it looks too much like a cut through here, so let's put a little bit of a tone through here. And then this section of the maxilla and the mandible has some bit of a tone. So again, light up in there, a little bit, light through there. And we're just trying to kind of sculpt the form here. So you shade with the structure. So I'm going to wrap this around. Try to get both those parts of the sternocleidomastoid muscle in here. Show that connection. So again, we spent a little time studying these ancient skulls. They're fun to study because you can see you can clearly see some of the differences in structural anatomy. And then we used elements of those from elements that we know exist in humans that we see around us. And we use that to create drawings, portraits of individuals with a great deal of character. And you can draw these your whole life and never do the same thing twice. So it's so much fun to play around with character studies. Again, whenever you're out in a public setting, it's great. Look at different people, study their nose, study their eyes, study their cheekbones, study all the different elements of the characters that you see, and then see if you can come home and draw them from memory. Some turn out better than others, but the more you draw, the better you get. And you do enough drawings, eventually you get one you like. I always think about, you know, if you want to get good at something, you got to do thousands and thousands and thousands of drawings. If you try to do a couple thousand drawings a year, and then you narrow it down to 100 drawings that you like, and then you take that 100, you narrow that down to 10 drawings that you like, and at the end of that, you end up with one good drawing a year, then you've really accomplished something. But the key is to work hard and do as much work as possible. If you want to be good at anything, you got to really work hard, and you have to be persistent and keep pushing forward and keep learning and keep growing. It's not good to just kind of do one or two pieces here and there and rest on your laurels and hope that that works for you. Hard work pays off. So again, you know, some of these turn out better than others. I'll work on this just a little bit more, and then I'll go ahead and stop the video. And I'll probably go back and work on this another hour, couple hours. We'll see. There's some things that bug me, and we'll see if I can fix them or not. And sometimes you can fix them, sometimes you can't. And it's just how it goes. I also find that sometimes when you think you're doing really well, you look at that drawing 6 months later, and it's kind of not very good. Some days you really feel like you're struggling, things aren't turning out well. You put the drawing away, and then you get it out 6 months later, and you're like, oh, that's the part that was bugging me, and you fix that, and then sure enough, it ends up being one of your better drawings from the year. So you can't always tell. You just have to be persistent and keep working at it hard. And just work on this back. I never got to this point here. So here's the back of the trapezius, and this wraps over here. So we want to make sure that all of this has a tone. Core shadow, reflected light, always a half tone leading into the core shadow. So the elements of shading, you always have to have a highlight, you have to have light, half tone, core shadow, reflected light, and depending on the situation, there's usually cast shadow, but not always. Where the sternocleidomastoid muscle splits. It always splits into two pieces, so let's show that just a little bit through here. And that portion coming in here. And usually the last thing I always like to add the highlight. That's usually the last portion I do. Highlight, and if I thought it was good enough to sign it, then ultimately that's probably the last thing I do. But And adding your signature is an important part. You don't want your signature to be the most noticeable thing on the page. A lot of times when people are first starting out, they just do some huge signature, and maybe that could be your thing too, you know. But I think it's nicer when it's more subtle and it becomes just part of the piece. And the rib cage would go off into there. Let's have another little fleshy fold through here. It's funny, you work on something and you think you're getting far along, and then you realize you've got a lot more to do. The key to this is to be really patient, be persistent, keep working at it. Shading in the end, shading can really make or break a piece, but in the end, a drawing will only be as good as the initial concept. So if it's poorly drawn to begin with, all the shading in the world won't redeem a poor conception. So as important as shading is, your idea and your concept is equally, if not more, important. So now I'll go ahead and I'll add the highlights in here now. And so there'd be a little bit of highlight through here. Right up in here has a highlight. Highlight on the top portion of this brow. Front of bone might have a little bit of highlight. There's always a highlight on the tip of the nose. Usually on the edge of the nasal bone is going to have a highlight. This little section on the top of the lid. The little crow's feet in here. Lower lid. There's a highlight in the eye. Section down below. The side plane of the nose is going to have a little highlight through here. The lip is going to have some light on it because it extends out. This portion of the maxilla is going to have some light. A little bit of light in there. A little bit of light on the chin. This section in there has a little light in there. The cheekbone, the zygomatic bone up here, and meets the temporal bone, so it forms the zygomatic arch. It has light coming through there. This little section in here has a little bit of light. And in here, up on the top of the parietal bone, has a little bit of light. Frontal bone meeting the parietal bone. The top portion of the ear, I wanted to have some light on it, right through here. The lobe has some light. This little area in there. Masseter. A little light on the vein. A little light on the sternocleidomastoid muscle. Clavicle, a little light in here. This fold has some light, a little bit of light through the top of this trapezius. Back in the occipital portion, there might have a little light in that one little spot. Same in here. Let's do a little bit more light through here. A little bit of light in there. A little bit of light there. And you want to be really careful not to overdo it with the highlights. You just pick out certain areas. There's a difference between the highlight and light. There's areas that can have light on it, and there's only certain areas that have highlights. And You got to be really careful with how you do that. Let's lighten that a little bit through there, through here. I want to lighten the top of this nose a tiny bit. I definitely want to see that little hook in the nose. We can lighten the forehead just a tiny bit here. Right on the plane, I want it to be softer. A little bit of light through there. There we go. And soften that section. So it's always good to remember to keep your drawings light too. So if you want to make some changes, you can. Some people like to start off working really dark. I prefer to work from light to dark as opposed to dark to light. Because when you use these type of pencils, the Prismacolor pencils, they don't erase well. They're very permanent, very archival, which is the good side. The downside is if you make a mistake, it's really difficult to fix. So I always work usually from the lighter side to the darker side. I know a lot of artists that prefer to work from dark to light. And that can be just a personal preference. So let me put a little bit more shadow and cast shadow under here from that fold down in here. And have that show a little fold through there. Increase that core shadow just a tiny bit through here. A little more. A little stronger portion here on the nose. A little bit more enhanced focal area, focal point. Soften the tone on the edge. And around this just a little bit more. And I want to make sure I connect that together. Have this be a little bit more of a flow, not so jagged. As we go down into the scapula, spine of the scapula, back of the trapezius. This vein needs to connect with the shadow. That's better. And the mandible, and the back of the master muscle here. Let's connect that a little better. All that go into shadow. And make this section just a tiny bit more pronounced. And a little softer as it goes under here. So you kind of have to keep going back and working on some of these planes and building it all up. Cast shadow in here. And I think we'll, let me go ahead and stop here. Let me just touch this up a little bit right through there. So this is just a quick rundown. Remember, we started here with the elements of drawing. We started off with two simple egg-shaped ovals. We began with a mark. We created line, which was a moving point. Then we added two egg-shaped ovals, which created shape. And then the next process after that was to then try to create three-dimensional form. And we did that using shading. And the elements of shading were to have the highlight, light, halftone, core shadow, reflected light, and cast shadow. And all those elements were applied to the understanding of artistic anatomy. We started with the osteology of the variety of skulls that were used. We used, I chose to use, especially in this back part, of ancient and aboriginal skull where it extended out greatly out the back. We did one earlier, we extended it up when using cranial elongation. This one I chose to use the extended portion of the back of the aboriginal head. I used the upper lip of the Native American skull that went back so that this was more in a straight line here with the facial angle. So if we went through here and through here, it was almost a 90-degree angle. The Aboriginal would have extended out here. The Peruvian also extended out here, but this I had to go straight up and down at a very pronounced wider cheekbone of the American Southwestern Indian skull, the ancient version of it, and didn't use too much of the Polynesian skull for this one. And then I took some of the anatomical, the muscle structure, and accentuated it to give it more strength so that it was a fuller, broader, more powerful male. So I had a very strong cheekbone and mandible biting area, very strong, powerful sternocleidomastoid muscle, the trapezius muscle, showing the sternocleidomastoid, how it splits in two portions. We have right through here, we have the head of the clavicle. We have the parietal bone up here. We have the occipital bone up here. The temporalis major that sits on top of the temporal bone. We have, actually, let me darken this just a tiny bit through here. The temporal ridge. And so all that underlying structure, the knowledge of anatomy, is all placed underneath to create this concept of the grotesque. Character studies and the art of the grotesque are ultimately one of my most favorite things to draw. And you can draw these forever. And I hope you enjoyed this little session here, and happy drawing. Thank you for watching.